The perfect murder had everything: a detailed confession from the killer's own brother, eyewitnesses, and a mountain of physical evidence. The gallows were all but built. The only thing the case lacked was a body, a fact a young, lanky attorney named Abraham Lincoln would help bring to light. Before he was president, Lincoln found himself at the heart of a bizarre legal drama where he helped reveal the victim was still alive, turning a deadly mystery destined for the hangman into one of history's strangest true crime stories. This is the true story of the murder that never was, a phantom crime that swept a frontier town into a vortex of mass hysteria in the spring of 1841. It's a tale of false confessions, mob justice, and a community so convinced of a crime that it nearly manufactured a killer out of thin air. And at the center of it all, observing with his sharp, melancholic eyes, was a young, lanky attorney named Abraham Lincoln. Before he was a president, before he was an emancipator, Lincoln was a student of human nature. In this bizarre episode, he would witness a masterclass in its strangest contradictions. He wouldn't be the hero who solved the case, but something more important: the one who understood it, documented it, and preserved for history one of the most baffling legal paradoxes in American history. He was the man who would unravel not the crime, but the illusion, and in doing so, tell a story stranger than any fiction. The air in Springfield that summer hung thick and heavy, smelling of greening sycamores, damp earth, and the ever-present dust kicked up from the clay-rutted streets. It was a town humming on the edge of the wilderness, a raw-boned capital of 3,500 souls where politics was a blood sport and gossip traveled faster than a stagecoach. Lawyers in sweat-stained linen argued on the courthouse steps, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer punctuated the whinny of horses, and in the taverns, whispers could build a man up or tear him down by nightfall. Among the lawyers was a 32-year-old named Abraham Lincoln. He was an ungainly figure, all sharp angles and long limbs, with a face that seemed etched by a sadness older than himself. But behind that plain, almost homely exterior was a mind like a steel trap, relentlessly logical and deeply skeptical of easy answers. He spent his days drafting deeds and arguing property disputes, his evenings debating with fellow legislators, all the while watching the grand, clumsy pageant of human ambition and folly play out before him. He had no idea he was about to get a front-row seat to one of its most peculiar acts. The story began not with a bang, but with the quiet creak of buggy wheels. It centered on three brothers, the Trailers, men of calloused hands and quiet dispositions, the kind who formed the sturdy, unremarkable backbone of any frontier community. William, the eldest, was a farmer from distant Warren County, a man weathered by the land and recently widowed. Henry, the middle brother, scratched out a living on a small farm near Clary's Grove, a rough-and-tumble settlement famous for its brawlers. The youngest, Archibald, was a carpenter in Springfield itself, respected for his craft and boarding with his business partner, a man named Myers. They were separate threads, living separate lives, about to be woven into a dark and tangled knot. The catalyst was another man, Archie Fisher. A solitary figure in his 50s, Fisher drifted through life as a handyman, lodging with William Trailer in Warren County. He was known for two things: his quiet, reclusive nature and a rumored, almost mythical personal fortune. People whispered that the frugal old drifter had squirreled away a cache of gold, a dangerous reputation to have when money was scarce and life was cheap. Fisher was a ghost even before he vanished. In late May, William decided to visit his brothers downstate. Fisher, perhaps seeking a change of scenery, asked to tag along. On the evening of Sunday, May 30th, their buggy rolled up to Henry's farm. The next morning, the three men, William and Fisher in the buggy, Henry on horseback, made the final 20-mile leg to Springfield, arriving under the bright, hot sun of midday. They met Archibald at his boarding house on Monroe Street. After a meal, the three brothers and their guest strode out into the afternoon, announcing they were off to see the town. Hours passed. The shadows lengthened across the dusty streets. As supper grew cold on the table, the three Trailer brothers returned, their faces flushed from the sun. But they were alone. Archie Fisher was gone. At first, their host, Myers, felt only a flicker of concern. Fisher was an odd man, prone to wandering. The brothers seemed unbothered. They claimed they had last seen him near a tavern and supposed he'd turn up. When he didn't appear by bedtime, They made a show of searching, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness before they returned, empty-handed. The next morning, Tuesday, the mood shifted. A faint but palpable tension had crept into the house. The brothers made another perfunctory search, but by noon, their patience had evaporated. William and Henry announced they were heading home. Myers and his wife were aghast. To abandon the man who had traveled with them, who had no horse or buggy of his own, seemed not just unkind but deeply suspicious. Their protests were met with stony indifference. The two elder trailers hitched up their buggy and left town, a curt departure that felt less like an inconvenience and more like a flight. Archibald remained, quiet and inscrutable. In the days that followed, a strange calm settled. Fisher's disappearance was a minor curiosity, a piece of town chatter, but nothing more. That calm was about to be shattered. A week later, a letter arrived for Springfield's postmaster from his counterpart in Warren County. The words on the page were a lit match to a tinderbox of frontier anxiety. William Traylor, the letter reported, had returned home alone. More than that, he'd been seen spending gold coins freely and had been heard boasting, bragging that Archie Fisher was dead and had left him a fortune of $1,500. The news ripped through Springfield's tight-knit community like a prairie fire. Gossip became gospel. The mayor and the state's attorney general took personal charge. The quiet disappearance of a drifter was now a full-blown murder investigation, and the town itself became the chief detective. A righteous fury, mingled with a thrilling, almost festive sense of purpose, seized the populace. If there was a crime, there must be a body. Hundreds of citizens formed search parties, a grim procession fanning out from the town limits. They combed the dense woods along the Sangamon River, their boots sinking into the mud. They dragged the murky, snake-infested waters of Hickox's Mill Pond. They drained wells, pried open the doors of cellars and sheds, and jabbed sticks into every suspicious patch of upturned earth. In their feverish hunt, they even dug up the fresh graves of animals, hoping to find human remains hidden beneath. Springfield had become a scene of righteous madness, a public crusade fueled by the certainty that a great evil had been done in their midst. But day after day, the search turned up nothing. The earth kept its secrets. The missing man remained missing. Frustrated, the authorities sent a deputy north to arrest William and Henry. Henry was brought back first, clapped in irons. He was taken to a room with the town's most powerful men, the mayor, the attorney general, a judge. The questions came like hammer blows, relentless, hour after hour, day after day. He denied everything. He knew nothing. He was innocent. Then, under the immense pressure of their certainty, worn down by fear and exhaustion, Henry Traylor broke. And the story he told was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. His confession, delivered in a low, steady voice, painted a scene of cold-blooded betrayal. He claimed that on Tuesday morning, the day after Fisher vanished, his brothers William and Archibald had confessed the murder to him. They had lured Fisher into the woods northwest of town and killed him for his gold. Now, they needed Henry's help to dispose of the body. He recounted how they led him to a dense thicket of hazel brush. He stood guard, he said, his heart pounding, while William and Archibald dragged a dead weight from the bushes. It was Fisher, unmistakably him. They loaded the corpse into their buggy, covered it with a buffalo robe, and drove toward the mill pond. Half an hour later, they returned, the buggy empty. The deed, they told him, was done. The confession was a bombshell. It was chillingly specific, filled with details that seemed too vivid to be invented. The town was horrified, but also vindicated. They had been right all along. Within hours, Archibald Traylor, the quiet carpenter, the man who had stayed behind, was seized and thrown into the town jail, as much for his own protection as for his crime. Outside, the mood turned ugly. In the saloons and on the street corners, talk turned to a rope and a tall tree. Springfield had its killers. The evidence, it seemed, was everywhere. Investigators, guided by Henry's story, found the very thicket he described. On the ground, they saw the deep tracks of a buggy and signs of a violent struggle, trampled grass and broken branches. Witnesses materialized. A local woman swore she had seen the three Traylor brothers and a fourth man, who matched Fisher's description, walk toward those woods. Later, she saw only the brothers emerge. Others testified they'd seen William and Archibald spending an unusual number of gold coins, yellow boys, they called them, in the days after Fisher's disappearance. Every piece fit. Henry's confession was the frame, and the evidence was the portrait of a perfect, brutal murder. The case was closed. Just as the town's fury reached its zenith, a new rider appeared on the horizon. It was the officer sent to arrest William Traylor. He had his prisoner in tow, but he wasn't alone. Beside him rode a country doctor named Gilmore, a man with an urgent, unbelievable story to tell. Dr. Gilmore approached the stunned officials and announced, with calm certainty, that a terrible mistake had been made. Archie Fisher, he said, was alive. He was, at that very moment, at Gilmore's own house, 7 miles from William's farm. He had appeared there that morning, alive but in a state of confusion, weak and rambling, unable to account for his whereabouts for the past 10 days. The officials, and the town, were incredulous. They smelled a trick. This doctor had to be part of a conspiracy, a desperate attempt to save the Traylors from the gallows. Their suspicion deepened when they confronted Henry with the news. He stared back, his expression unchanged, and insisted his story was true. His brothers were murderers. This doctor was a liar. Springfield's excitement peaked once more. Half the town cried, "Hoax," while the other half was too bewildered to know what to think. The stage was set for one of the most surreal legal hearings in American history. The next day, a formal inquiry opened before 2 justices. The makeshift courtroom crackled with tension. The prosecution presented its case, and it was devastating. Henry Traylor took the stand and, under oath, calmly repeated his entire confession. He withstood hours of cross-examination without flinching, his story holding firm. The woman who saw the men enter the woods testified with unwavering confidence. The men who saw the gold coins testified. The evidence of the buggy tracks and the trampled thicket was presented. The case was a fortress. Then, Dr. Gilmore was called to the stand. In a plain, unvarnished manner, he told his story. He had known Archie Fisher for years, he explained. The man was not entirely well. Years prior, he had suffered a severe head injury, and ever since, he had been prone to episodes of mental derangement, fits of confusion where he would wander off for days at a time. Fisher showing up at his house, disoriented and unwell, was not a surprise to him. It was a pattern. Gilmore's sincerity was absolute. His calm, rational explanation stood in stark contrast to the high-pitched drama and hysteria of the past week. A hush fell over the courtroom. You could feel the certainty that had held the town in its grip begin to fracture. The justices, faced with the unshakable testimony of a credible doctor, had no choice. The case, built on a foundation of panic and lies, collapsed like a house of cards. The Traylor brothers were released. The final, irrefutable proof arrived the following Monday. Archibald's partner, Myers, rode back into Springfield. And with him, sitting pale and bewildered in the wagon, was none other than Archie Fisher himself, alive, corporeal, and very much not murdered. The town stared in stunned silence at the ghost in their midst. The perfect murder had come undone. Henry's confession had been a complete fabrication, a desperate, inexplicable fantasy born of fear or madness. The trampled thicket, the buggy tracks, the eyewitnesses, all of it was a grand, terrible coincidence. A phantom crime, built of thin air, had vanished as quickly as it appeared. In the aftermath, an almost eerie quiet descended. Within a year, William Traylor was dead, perhaps broken by the ordeal. Archibald followed him to the grave not long after. Henry lived on for many years, a man marked by his own bizarre lie, never again speaking of the affair. But Abraham Lincoln could not let it go. For him, the Traylor case was more than a local curiosity. It was a profound lesson in the frailty of human certainty. A week after Fisher's return, he wrote a long, meticulous account of the entire episode to his closest friend, Joshua Speed. With his characteristic dry wit and keen eye for absurdity, he laid out every twist and turn, marveling at how an entire community, armed with what it believed was incontrovertible evidence, had become utterly convinced of a murder that never occurred. A stranger affair, Lincoln concluded, never really occurred. He saw how fear could masquerade as fact, how coincidence could be mistaken for proof, and how a compelling narrative, even a false one, could be more powerful than a messy, improbable truth. The case was a perfect storm of rumor, pressure, and a psychological phenomenon Lincoln intuitively understood. Once people decide on a story, all evidence is filtered through the lens of that conclusion. It was a story that belonged in the pages of Edgar Allan Poe, a tale of doppelgangers, phantom crimes, and the darkness of the human imagination. And yet, it was all true. For the young lawyer from the prairie, it was an early, unforgettable lesson. He had watched as the machinery of justice, powered by mob passion, nearly ground up innocent men. He had seen truth arrive not with a thunderclap, but as a quiet, inconvenient fact delivered by a country doctor. It was a lesson he would carry with him through a career spent wrestling with far greater, nation-defining conflicts. That truth, no matter how improbable, will always have the final word.